So we've been looking at theories about right and wrong. What is it for an action to be right? What is it for an action to be wrong? We'd like to find some kind of formula that holds in all cases for each of those. And today we're going to look at some theories that centrally revolve around God. And both of these theories make right and wrong pretty directly have to do with God. And in this lecture, I'm going to be pretty much assuming that God exists. Because I'm talking about a discussion that went on mostly in the Middle Ages and the early modern period, but to some extent in the ancient world as well. I'm talking about a conversation here, or a series of conversations that are mostly between theists, people who believe in God, monotheists. So we're going to talk about divine command theory and natural law theories. I've got Michelangelo's painting here of God, calling into existence the universe. Just so you know, God isn't really supposed to be a European man with a big gray beard and a pink outfit. He's not supposed to be a being with a body. He's supposed to be a perfect spirit. But I digress. So I'm going to go through now what the divine command theory is and talk about some theoretical virtues of it. In other words, these are 5 features that make divine command theory attractive, at least if you're a theist. So the definition of divine command theory, as I'll discuss it, is this. For X to be right means that X is commanded by God. And for X to be wrong is for X to be forbidden by God. So, why is it right to keep your promises? It's because God says that you should keep your promises. Why is it wrong to commit adultery? Because God says you shall not commit adultery. Why is it wrong to murder? Because God says you shall not commit murder. Why is it right to worship God? Because God commands that He should be worshipped. And finally, for X to be morally neutral, that is neither right nor wrong, that means that X is neither commanded nor forbidden by God. So the virtue here is simplicity and clarity. Look, if we understand what's meant by God, and we understand what it is to issue a command, and we do understand those things, then we can understand what rightness is. And if we understand what it is for God to forbid something, then we understand what wrongness is. And likewise with being morally neutral. So it's just a really simple and clear theory. It's not a theory like Kant's, where you really have to worry about what some of the central formulas mean, how they're related to one another. And there's even some unclarity in Mill's theory as well. Okay, what else? Another theoretical virtue is it answers the question, why be moral? And that's a nice feature of a moral theory. Why should you be moral? Well, there's 2 ways to answer this. There's a practical reason, and the practical reason is you don't want to go here. You don't want to go to hell, you want to go to heaven. But the theory also arguably suggests a moral reason why you should be moral. Just that God wants you to be moral. God commands people to be good. One point in the Bible, Jesus says, be perfect just as your heavenly Father is perfect. Maybe this is a moral reason too, that God just inherently has the authority to command us, to tell us what to do. So why should you be moral? Well, because God has that authority. There might be a problem with that, which we'll look at later, but on the face of it, that seems good. Third, divine command theory shows how ethics is objective, not merely based on opinion or feeling, or relative to individuals or cultures. It provides an objective basis for right and wrong. It doesn't matter whether you approve or disapprove of a certain action. All that matters is, has God commanded it or has God forbidden it? Fourth, and this is related, divine command theory at least suggests at least one method for determining what is right and what is wrong. If to be right is to be commanded and to be wrong is to be forbidden, then we need to just find out what God has commanded and forbidden. And there have been different methods suggested for that. Maybe you can pray. Maybe you can consult God directly, as it were. Or maybe God has inspired a book, like the Bible or the Quran. And this book will tell you what God has commanded and forbidden. Well, then that book will tell you what's right and what's wrong, according to the divine command theory. Maybe you can find out what's right and wrong from God's messengers. Maybe God sends prophets. And maybe, finally, God has built human beings, so to speak, with his voice in them. Maybe God has designed the human conscience, and what your conscience tells you corresponds to with what God commands and forbids. So if your conscience says don't do it, your conscience only says that when it's something that God has forbidden. And if your conscience says you ought to do that, that's because God has actually commanded it. Maybe God has just set things up this way so that your conscience correlates to his commands. But even if so those are how many different ways? 1, 2, 3, 4 different ways. But even if just one of those ways is reliable, then there's a way that we can determine what's right and what's wrong. You might think that this makes divine command theory more practical than, say, Mill's theory, because you might think it's impossible to calculate what overall is going to provide more happiness or the most happiness of all the possible actions before you. Fifth, and this is maybe the biggest attraction for some people, divine command theory just fits well with the idea that commands require a commander and that laws require a lawgiver. If you think about right and wrong in terms of commands, then it seems that there has to be a commander. The idea of a command just floating free in the universe, which isn't anybody's command, that seems like nonsense. Again, if you think about right and wrong in terms of laws, you shall do this, you shall not do that. Well, laws require a lawgiver. And arguably, the laws of morality don't come from human societies. Arguably, they're the same across all human societies. And, even if there weren't any societies, even if there were just two people on a desert island, then it seems that the laws of morality would still be binding on those people. It would still be true that the one should not rape the other. It would still be true that the one should not lie to the other. It would still be true that, that's supposed to be a palm tree. It'd still be true that one should not, that they should be kind to one another. So, that's not a society, right? Not really, which is two people. But arguably, the laws of morality would still hold. Maybe that's just because God would still exist and would still be making the commands that he makes. Or suppose there was no society, there was just one person. There's no human society at all. But there's, I don't know, a penguin. Still, there might be moral principles that apply to this person, even though he's not in any human society. He shouldn't beat the penguin up just for the fun of it. He shouldn't tease the penguin mercilessly just for the fun of it, and so on. He ought to feed the penguin if he can. Anyway, arguably right and wrong don't depend on societies and don't come from societies. But if right and wrong, if morality is fundamentally a matter of laws, then laws seem to require a lawgiver which has always been around and will always be around, because moral principles seem to apply everywhere and at all times and places. Okay, so those are some theoretical virtues of divine command theory, some reasons why it is an attractive theory. Here's an argument that some philosophers have given for divine command theory. It's an argument from divine sovereignty, from the idea that God is in charge. So they would define sovereignty in this way: for any truth, it is true just because God freely decides to make it true. So they think God is in control. If you exist, that's because God has freely decided that you should exist. If the Allies won World War II, that's because God freely decided that the Allies would ultimately win World War II. And if 1 plus 1 is 2, that's because God has freely decided that 1 plus 1 is 2. Okay, but some truths are moral truths, right? So it's wrong to commit rape. If God is sovereign in this sense, then it's wrong to commit rape. That's true just because God has freely decided to make it true. It was up to God's will that rape is wrong. The principle that you should keep your promises, that's true because God decided to make that true. So the argument goes, if God is sovereign, then the divine command theory is true. To be right is to be commanded, to be wrong is to be forbidden. Second premise, God is sovereign, and then the conclusion, divine command theory. Now, there's a number of things that you could think are wrong with this argument, but I'm going to make an objection that monotheistic philosophers gave a long time ago to this. It goes as follows. I would say that premise 2 is false, because there are some truths that are necessary. It's just not possible that they're false. So given what sovereignty means, that for any truth it's true just because God freely decides to make it true, and because it was free, right, it's possible for it to not be true. You can argue that's false because some truths are necessary. A necessary truth is one such that it's not possible that it be false. And actually, it turns out to suppose it's false is actually contradictory. So 2 plus 2 is 4. And it doesn't just happen to be that way. It couldn't possibly be false, and it has to be true. If you have 2 things and you add 2 more things to those original 2 things, you've got 4 things. Now, of course, these symbols that we've written here, it's possible that those could mean something else. There could be a language other than English in which those marks mean babies are cute, or the sky is blue, or ham sandwiches are delicious. But given what they mean in English, that thing that thought that they express, that thing is true and couldn't possibly be false. It's contradictory to suppose that it's false.